The first time I saw the donor wall, I thought it looked like a family tree that forgot to be shy. It's a two-story grid of bronze leaves and beveled names in the hospital's new glass atrium, and if you stand at the right angle, you can see the old brick wing reflected in it like a grandfather telling a joke the children don't get yet. My wife, Alice, loved that wall. She kept the box cutter in her tote for the days a new plaque arrived, and she'd slit the cardboard like a gift, lift the name out of foam with both hands, and hold it to the light to make sure the serif on the R looked rich enough. She believed in names that way, placed them right, and people behave like they belong to something worthy. My job is to keep other kinds of names where they belong. I'm a cybersecurity analyst who spends his days designing incident playbooks and access control trees for companies that assume their worst day will happen on a Tuesday. I could have worked for the hospital. They asked. I said no because I didn't want to smell antiseptic every time I solved the problem. Instead, I donate time to events as a favor to Alice, stringing HDMI through places HDMI doesn't like to go, building slide loops that make donors clap on cue, keeping the Gala AV from crashing while the CEO says transformative and means it. I am good at boring things that make other people's magic look easy. The night the sound changed, I knew it had nothing to do with magic. It was a small sound in a big house, and that's why it mattered. The whine of the garage door at 12,043 a.m., a rhythm that didn't match the headlights I saw slice our bedroom ceiling. Alice never parks on the left. She thinks the left side of the garage is unlucky. That night she did, and the sound the door made when it met the concrete sounded like a polite cough in a funeral home. She moved like she was being careful with someone else's glassware. When she slid into bed, the mattress dipped like a boat with a new passenger who was trying to learn our tides. She smelled like basil and hotel air. "You're late," I said into the dark. "Printer jam," she whispered. I stayed to run signage. And then the sponsor had a last-minute ask. Same story, different checkbook. I could have turned on the lamp and become the kind of man who wants eye contact more than sleep. I didn't. I collected small sounds the way I collect logs at work. Printer jam had the wrong pitch. Sponsor had the right number of syllables and none of the right heat. When she rolled away and her hair tickled my face, I remembered the line from our wedding ceremony where my uncle called love the miracle of attention. He meant attention to each other. I have always been better at attention to everything else. The next morning, the valet stub lay on the console of her car like a talisman. I wouldn't have noticed it if the perforation hadn't torn at an angle that looked like impatience. Valet stubs say things they don't mean to say. The hour, the place, the order of events hidden behind a coat check smile. This one said 0:1031 post midnight on a Thursday, and it listed the downtown hotel across from the hospital, not the hospital's own garage. The back had a little smudge from a stamp with a name I recognized only because Alice had said it beautifully the week before in our kitchen, Elijah. She'd said it to the cat when she was reading the staff awards list and practicing the way she'd make everyone feel seen. "Elijah from cardiology," she'd said. "That kid has the soft hands of a saint." I told myself a story I could stand. Elijah was off shift. The sponsor meeting ran long. They debriefed across the street because caffeine goes where the credit card does. Then I opened the family credit account to categorize monthly spend like a good budget husband and found a cafeteria till charge at 2017, which was the wrong kind of late for a person who had crawled into our bed smelling like a place I didn't know yet. In my world, you don't fix things by guessing. You fix them by building a timeline that cares more about time than about lines. I started one. I labeled it like I label everything. Date, source, detail, and I tucked it into a folder that wasn't blue because blue makes my brain think of HR. I did not hack the hospital. I did not sneak into her email. I did what normal spouses do when they need proof to keep their own ghost from giving testimony. I went to the kitchen junk drawer, took out the shoebox where she dumps anything that looks like a receipt, and found a stack of valet stubs thick enough to count like rosary beads. I didn't count them. I wrote down the dates. I put the shoebox back where she leaves it when she comes home tired and proud. Then I drove to work and pretended to care that someone in Singapore had guessed one of our VP's security questions, because care is a muscle, and it does not enjoy becoming optional. The hospital gala was 3 weeks away. The foundation liked to call it the Giving Heart Dinner, which made me imagine an anatomical model with a napkin tucked into its sternum. The theme changes every year, but the job doesn't. Tell the richest people in town a story that makes them forget about return on investment for 90 minutes. Alice had done it for 8 years without missing. She began planning in November and didn't come back to Earth until April. She lived on spreadsheets and to-do lists and the high you get from a yes that comes with 4 zeros. This year they were doing light through windows, which sounded like a boutique candle and looked like mercury glass on the tables and a lot of quotes about gratitude in cursive. I said yes to AV because saying no would have been noticed, and I couldn't afford to tip the plot before a room full of florists and florist helpers had even started arguing about hydrangeas. I almost told her in the prep meeting when she was all elbows and agenda, hair yanked into a bun that meant business, that the night she said printer jam, our timeline had disagreed. Instead, I watched her annotate the program while the CEO pretended to be humble about whose name would go where in the seating chart. I carried spools of cable into an empty ballroom that would soon think it was drenched in meaning, and I stacked them in a corner like a fortress for a lonely child. When the vendor brought the projector I won't name because it's a piece of equipment, not a person, Alice said, Evan will baby it. He's the only one who can make those things behave when the lights get needy. I smiled like the hero of someone else's story. I went home and opened the folder. The printer jam night was one of 3 with stub times past midnight and cafeteria charges after 2. I checked our family Uber account, the one we set up when she decided cabs were for people who aren't friends with their phones. 2 trips that week, one from the hotel to our house at 12,055, one 5 days later from the hospital to the same hotel at 11,008. I opened the Photos app on my own phone to send my mother proof that the cat is still alive and found a live photo Alice had airdropped me days ago because she loved the way the donor wall caught the afternoon sun. Most people don't know, the phone grabs a second of sound with those photos. I held my breath and listened to the echoing atrium in her breath and then a man's voice, low, saying, "You should stay. Not loud, not close, not ghost, real." I do not imagine voices, I design systems. This is the part where you expect me to go through her phone. I didn't. She has a passcode because we're people who live in the world and don't want barista hands in our DMs. I didn't snoop because I didn't want to be the man who turns a marriage into an audit. I wanted to be the man who shows up with a list instead of a knife. The second week I told Alice I needed the building occupancy chart from facilities, the one the fire marshal loves and no one else reads. For safety, I said. I want the slides to feel like we understand our own room. She forwarded me the spreadsheet with a casual flourish that told me I hadn't become a different kind of person in her eyes yet. The sheet had columns for after-hours access by door, because donors will come in through doors they aren't supposed to and everyone likes to pretend we're all in on the joke. There was also a line for badge access by department because everything at the hospital is a department even if it's 3 people in a cart. I didn't need patient data. I didn't want patient data. I wanted to know how many times a cardiology badge went click in the atrium between midnight and 3 a.m. in the last 2 months. The number made my mouth taste like I'd licked the copper out of a penny. I had all the parts of a confession and none of the clean. That's the problem with building a case when you're not trying to win a trial. Your evidence starts to look like something someone could use to sell tickets. I am allergic to spectacle. I am also addicted to timing. The loop for the gala. 8 minutes of donor names on a warm background, intercut with patient stories and photos of babies in hats, needed a heartbeat. Alice jokingly told me that once. Make it breathe, she said. Make them not look away. So I made it breathe. Right after the slides with the 1978 photo of the hospital's old ER and the single slide thanking the city's largest bank for underwriting the cocktail hour, I placed a 45-second interstitial that looked like a safety brief. It was gray. It was quiet. It listed timestamps and locations and 2 stills, a valet stub with a stamp, and a screenshot of a cafeteria charge. It had a small line at the bottom that said public sources, because irony likes to walk next to integrity when they both think they're not being photographed. The title was Night Shift Cadence. I showed it to no one. This is where I tell you about the fight that didn't happen. There were opportunities. The night she came home wearing the shoes she calls her good luck heels and put them in the closet like they belong somewhere holy, the morning she said she'd slept at the office because volunteers can be idiots and look me dead in the eye, as if she were telling the world a thing that didn't require apology, the afternoon she practiced saying, "And our staff of the year Elijah," in the kitchen while that cat glared at me for not being the kind of man who fed him enough attention at 3 p.m. I didn't fight. I fixed the audio mixer the high school jazz quartet murdered with their enthusiasm, and I labeled the inputs and I tested the projection on the ballroom wall until the CEO's executive assistant told me to stop because I was making her cry with stock photos of smiles. On the last walkthrough before donors arrived, Alice handed me the clicker for the slide loop and touched my shoulder with her free hand, the way she does when she needs the room to watch her head move into a new scene. "Make it sing," she said, distracted. "And don't let it crash during the award. Please, babe." Her calling me babe made the part of me that likes to hurt itself lean forward. I nodded. I tested the interstitial again, alone, and watched the numbers pass like seconds in an operating room. Then I put the clicker in my pocket and did what I promised. I didn't let it crash. Gala nights are theater that happens to the rich. The valet line sparkles. The atrium becomes a hive that smells like rosemary and new shoes. Donors pretend they don't know where the cameras are and then find them anyway. The CEO came in with sleeves that tried to look like she did her own work. The board chair took his place like a chess piece that likes to move in straight lines. Alice glowed, and I do mean glowed. There's a specific vibration she puts out on event nights that says, "I made this room and it made me back." If you've never seen the person you love become a planet, I hope you never do. It's gorgeous and it will kill you if you're not careful. She was mercy to everyone, even the caterer who delivered short on lamb. She introduced me to donors by saying, "This is Evan, he's why you can hear and see anything," and I smiled like a man who didn't have a fuse in his pocket. At table 3 sat a woman I didn't know and a man I did. I had to swallow when I saw him because everything in me wanted to explain to my legs that they weren't invited to whatever came next. Elijah did not look like a saint. He looked like a person who has a job that makes people look at you like you keep enemies out of their chests and then go home feeling entitled to a bigger world than the one he earned. His hair was polite in a way that made me want to muss it. He sat with the other honorees: respiratory therapist, NICU nurse, volunteer who has folded blankets for 27 years like it was a sacrament. He laughed and then cut the laugh in half when he saw Alice move across the room. Do I think they plan to be careful? Yes. Do I think they plan to be good? No. This is not a story about two people who fell into something because the universe slipped a banana peel under their feet. This is a story about two people who thought the wall of names would protect them because they were useful and because they were kind to the wall. At 7:32, the lights did their cultured dim and the pianist stopped playing music that thinks it's better than you. The CEO stepped up to the podium, said transformative, said community, said heart, and the donors clapped like rain. The loop played on the side screens. Names slid by in an expensive font. Babies in hats proved the concept that cuteness deflects doubt. A father with a grateful voice said the AED in a school gym saved his son, and the board chair put a hand to his chest like it had just arrived. Then the gray slide came up, and my heart did nothing interesting because I had rehearsed this moment enough times to make adrenaline bored. The first line said, Wednesday, O Ether 51 Atrium Badge Access, Staff Door. The second said, 0114 Cafeteria Transaction Coffee, 2 protein bars. The third said, 02038, Exit Recorded, Valet Stub O Ether 1371. At the bottom, very calmly, a footnote said, Public Sources. The You Should Stay audio didn't play, the slide was text only, but a still of a live photo sat in the corner with a caption too small for anyone beyond the first 5 tables to read. I hadn't put their names on it, I hadn't put her name on it, I had put the hospital's life on it, a small truth in a big room. Rooms can learn. You can feel them do it. The collective gaze tilted. Confusion first, like someone introducing a friend and then not explaining why they did, then the kind of amusement money craves because donors like to be on the inside of a joke. Then a very quiet kind of understanding that you get only if you've been in a war room or a birth or a courtroom when the thing that matters finally hits the table. It lasts half a second. If you miss it, you think the world is just laughter and gasps. Alice saw it. She was standing with the AV table and her head snapped toward the screen like it had called her by a nickname only she was allowed to use. She turned back to me with a face I had not hired. It was small, it was angry, it was scared exactly enough to be worth something. She reached for the clicker on the table. I had it in my pocket and my hand over it like a prayer. I shook my head. I didn't smile. I didn't look away. It loops, I said softly. You asked me to make it breathe? She didn't yell. She did something worse. She went still. Stillness is her warning. She moves when she believes. She freezes when the room needs to notice itself without her telling it how. She watched the donors read lines no one had marketed to them. She watched the board chair lean to the CEO and whisper with lips that believed themselves to be discreet. She watched Elijah watch the people watching. The gray slide was 45 seconds. The program is 8 minutes. The room had 45 seconds of wondering if it was part of an art piece, then trying to be the kind of audience that gets it, then deciding that someone had put a thing in front of it that wasn't supposed to be there. When the loop moved on to the baby hats, the donors exhaled like they'd been holding breath for a trick. It was not a trick. The trick came later. Alice didn't move. Her eyes were wet in a way I'm not proud to remember I loved. She touched my sleeve. You put it in, she said. I kept it simple, I said. Take it out. No. I will fire you. You don't employ me, I said, and it sounded like a joke that wasn't. Do you want to ruin me? She whispered. I want the room to hold it, I said, just once. I will lose my portfolio, she said. I will lose Elijah. I would say I flinched because she said his name. I didn't. The thing about evidence is that it makes the people who say yes inside you go sit down in the back row. Then we'll be done, I said, because there are times to speak in the future tense and times to live in the perfect. The gray slide came around again. This time it wasn't alone. It brought with it donors who had elbowed their neighbors gently and muttered lines like security and audit, and who put that there? It brought with it a woman from the board whose husband owns half the country's wheat and who has unlearned the art of being surprised with grace. She put a hand on Alice's arm that could have been a mother's or a judge's. What am I looking at? She asked in the kind of voice men in my field use when they ask if we still have backups. Alice's throat moved. It's a cadence slide, she said. Professional first. Safety brief. Evan added it to show how hard our night staff works. She turned to me and a look in her eyes said, this is your last chance to love me the way I prefer. The board woman has run for office twice and lost with dignity once. She can smell a lie that's trying to make itself smaller even when it has big shoes on. She looked at me and then at Elijah and then at the gray numbers. She let her face flatten into a map she was folding for the winter. Take it out after the program, she said to me. It will be gone in 9 minutes, I said. No one will know it was here except everyone. And then the program demanded to be fed, and the CEO talked about honor, and the donors right to the story, and the jazz quartet played like their instruments had feelings, and my loop moved in its circle, and the gray truth breathed 3 times in a room that was used to seeing itself in bronze. They gave Elijah his award. They said words about compassion and calm and the way he passed a tiny wire through a broken artery like a god threading a needle. He hugged the CEO with the deference of a second son. He hugged Alice like the world had assigned them to the same secret. He didn't see Margot in the back, the wife of a general surgeon with a talent for making rooms do what he wants, raising her phone to snap a picture she would send to a group text with a caption that read in only 3 words, well, well, well. It didn't explode. I know you wanted to. The plate didn't shatter. No one yelled home wrecker in sequins. That is not how our city works. Money hates messes it didn't schedule. But the gray slide did its work. After dessert, the COO took Alice's elbow the way his mother taught him and walked her toward the kitchen as if they were going to discuss whether the salmon should have been more interested in itself. The chief development officer took me to the AB table where he had asked me last year to put a full-color logo on the sponsorship screen and said, "Don't go anywhere." Elijah went out the side door and stared at the donor wall like it had been whispering about him for years. The board woman made a phone call that involved a sentence containing the word policy. The kitchen isn't a room you think it is until you have to use it for something it didn't sign up for. It's loud in church ways and smells like oil that wishes it were clean. The COO directed traffic with placid hands while two line cooks silently pretended they had not been conscripted into a marriage. The chief development officer closed the door and said, "We're about to have a meeting," like the world was a forum with checkboxes. The CEO arrived, her hair less heroic with an apron over it, and behind her, thin as a question, came Brenda from HR with a folder that made me picture confetti falling inside it like credits. I knew better than to talk first. I don't think Alice did. She started to say, "This is a misunderstanding," and then stopped because misunderstanding is the wrong size of word for a thing that has a timestamp. "I asked Evan to take the slide out," she said instead. "He didn't. That's on me." "It's on him," Brenda corrected. "Swedish sugar that's about to burn. And it's on us, because we let it happen in public, which is something we'll address later." The board woman walked in with the composure of a preschool director and closed the door behind her as if she had just kept the air from escaping a balloon. She turned to me. "Do you care to explain what this was?" she asked. I told them the truth like it was a shopping list. Valet stubs, Uber receipts, our joint credit charge at the cafeteria after 2 in the morning, the building occupancy chart showing after-hours access by door, a live photo with a second of audio. The award script that says a name my wife practiced. I did not put anyone's name on the slide. I put the hospital's nights on it, because they're mine too. "You're accusing our events director of," the COO started, and the board woman stopped him with a hand. "No," she said. "He's placing a fact in a room that's allergic to facts that arrive without place cards." "My marriage is a separate meeting," I said. "This meeting is about whether a hospital wants to pretend no one sees or hears what it's doing. I'm done pretending." Then I turned to HR because there are days when you are too tired to be anything besides the person whose job it is to say the line people pay you for. "I don't want anything from you tonight except your policy, the one that says staff are to avoid activities that compromise patient care or the hospital's reputation." I didn't cite HIPAA, I didn't cite patient harm, I cited the cafeteria and a valet stub. I asked the room to hold the truth once before we all go back to the bronze wall. The board woman nodded like a teacher with a good student in a bad class. "We're going to speak with Mr. Elijah," she said softly, "and we're going to speak with our own conscience." They brought Elijah into the kitchen. He looked smaller under fluorescent than under praise. The chef's knife on the counter pointed at nothing, as if it were intentionally de-escalating. Brenda asked, "Have you been meeting with Ms. Hart after hours in ways that would violate staff conduct guidelines?" He said, "We've worked closely." She said, "Have you crossed professional boundaries?" He said, after a long glance at Alice and at me and at the floor, "Yes." There are moments you rehearse in your head for years, and they do not look like your rehearsal. He didn't beg. He didn't swagger. He confessed because it was the only escape route that left him with a self he'd recognize. The CEO closed her eyes for a second, the way people from church do when they are recording sad history on purpose. The COO looked relieved to have something to put in a bullet point. "Go home," Brenda said to Elijah. "Leave your badge. HR will contact you in the morning. Do not touch patient records. Do not return to the floor." "Are you firing me?" he said. "I'm preventing tonight from breaking anything that matters," she said. "What happens Monday isn't tonight's job." Alice said nothing. That might be the worst thing she did in that kitchen, and the kindest. She didn't reach for him. She didn't look for me. She let the board woman's eyes hold her in place long enough to begin telling the truth to herself and hate it. She asked me for my car keys. I shook my head. She had her own. When we walked back into the atrium, the donors were practicing pretending nothing had happened. That's what they're good at, and they pay well for it. I stopped by the donor wall because I wanted to see if names looked different after you asked them to work. They didn't. That is the problem with walls. They reflect you whether you're ready to look or not. In the days that followed, the hospital did the thing institutions do when they've been reminded they have a soul to keep. They formed a committee. They called it something with culture in it. They met in a glass room with a ficus. They interviewed people who don't usually get asked what they think, and they took notes and they promised to send out an email. Elijah was placed on administrative leave pending further review and then transferred to a non-patient-facing role that sounded like exile with benefits. The foundation reorganized portfolios, which meant Alice's list of donors became someone else's list. The event had raised enough money to make everyone feel better about what the gray slide did to the room. The CEO wrote a measured note to staff about professionalism that included the line, "Our values are a verb." At home, there was no glass room. There was the kitchen table and the shoebox and the sink that had never learned to do dishes by itself. Alice didn't try to sell me any of the scripted apologies you could buy at the relationship store. She sat on the other side of the table like a person with a jury she didn't have the energy to flatter. "I'm sorry," she said. "No adjectives, just that." She took off her ring and set it on the table. The inner rim had a soft dent from the time we tried to knock a nail in with it because the toolbox was in the car. She put her finger over the dent like a man closing a book. I love you, I said, because some truths aren't about verdicts. That doesn't mean we get to keep pretending we're the people who promised each other we'd never do this. I wanted it to be small, she said. I wanted something I could put in my pocket and carry around like a breath mint and then spit out before I got home. It wasn't small, it was greedy. I was greedy. I built a loop for a living, I said. You broke the loop. We didn't yell. We did logistics. We found the mediator whose office smelled like the idea of pine. We said phrases like equitable distribution and primary residence that sound like math because math is supposed to be fair. We gave each other permission to keep certain records and burn others and never speak about which is which. She rented an apartment near the museum with bad water pressure and light that makes mornings feel expensive. I kept the house because I can't stand moving my body through a history that never asked for me. We told our parents at the same time so no one could confuse the timeline. We combined our AirPods into a box and split the playlist like we were divvying up a child with rhythm. I did what I had promised myself in the kitchen. I went to therapy. Dr. Patel sat in a chair that looked like not a doctor and asked me what I wanted that wasn't a fix. I said, I want to stop apologizing to my own worst day for not being a better host. He said, you did a kind thing in an unkind place. I said, it didn't feel kind. He said, kindness and comfort rarely shake hands. He gave me a list called boundaries that are not punishments. And at the top, in my own handwriting, because he makes you write your own exits, was, you don't have to carry her next year for the story to make sense. People talk. This is not New York. It's a city with one newspaper and 7 group texts. The board woman's quote about culture made it into a gossip column as a joke. I think she knew it would. Someone on staff called me the AV guy who turned into HR. I wanted to be angry at that and couldn't quite get there because it made sense. My job had been to make sure a room could hear itself. I did it. I didn't set out to humiliate anybody. If humiliation arrived, it came because the facts have poor manners around pride. Elijah's wife. Yes, there was one. Of course there was. My blind spot was not the only one. Sent me an email that was 2 sentences long and more graceful than anything I had expected from a stranger who had sat at table 3 while the people in our city practiced with their forks. She wrote, thank you for not making me find out on Facebook, and I hope you get to be gentle with yourself before you go back to being useful. I wrote back, I will try, and printed the exchange and stuck it in the blue folder because some papers need neighbors. Alice and I are not enemies. We are also not the people we were when I stood under the donor wall and watched her hold a bronze name like it might bleed. We text politely about things that deserve politeness. She sent me a photo of a plant she kept alive for 2 months straight like a confession of competence. I sent her a screenshot of the playlist we both used to listen to on Sundays. We agreed on furniture with a speed that made both our mothers suspicious. When I told her I was telling this story, she said, make me sound better than I was, and I said no, and she said, then at least make me sound real, and I said, you always have. Here's what I learned that is not immoral but sits near one. People who raise money for good things are very good at telling stories that make people behave. Sometimes they tell them to themselves and think they count. Sometimes the only way to make the story honest again is to make a slide that doesn't want to be applauded. If you find yourself holding a truth that will eat you if you keep it, do not feed it music. Put it in a room where it can breathe for 45 seconds without anyone telling it to smile. Then turn it off and go outside. The names on the wall will not fall down. The room will not explode. Your life might, but not in a way you can't survive if you let yourself be the kind of person who doesn't need to be right to be free. What would you have done if you were the one holding the clicker? Would you have kept it between 2 people and begged the world to stay out of it? Or would you have let the room carry the truth once so you didn't have to carry it forever? Tell me in the comments where your line is between discretion and denial. If this story stuck with you, hit like so it finds the next person standing in a ballroom with a pulse in their pocket and a truth in their throat. Subscribe for more and share it with someone who still thinks a printer jam at 12,043 a.m. is anything but a date with a different kind of paper.